My name is René Schmidt. To my left here is Martin, and right down here is Stefan. So Stefan is running a group inside the vSphere product group, where we are responsible for doing vApps and OVF in the vCenter product. We are also responsible for the work we do with DMTF on the OVF specification, and a bunch of other minor things. But the vApp and the OVF stuff is sort of the primary stuff that we do, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So you have probably seen this before a few times, so it's the same. The agenda today is sort of split in three parts. The first thing we're going to talk about is vApps, vApp configurations, and OVF packages. So that's sort of introducing the core concepts that we're going to use. Then we're going to move in and talk specifically about the OVF environment and OVF properties. So these are two really, really useful things once we're talking about templates and deploying templates. And then finally, a bunch of related tools. And as you can see, this is a very heavily demo-oriented presentation. So I'm actually going to be speaking half the time. Half the time is going to be Martin going to show live demos on vSphere 4.1 on our little demo setup here. So this is hopefully going to be a really practical and useful information, not just a bunch of slideware. But I'm going to sort of try and set the stage for the demos. So before we sort of dive into the details here, I want to talk a little bit about the vision here. And we're all having our data centers, we have all our physical hardware, we have vSphere installed on top of it. And what do we do with this? Well, we install software on top of it. We need to install the software that runs the business. So a big part of our jobs every day is actually installing this software, get it installed, get to run. Now, installing software, as we all know, is sort of painful, right? Software comes in all kind of different shapes and sizes. Some of it is MSI installers, some of it needs special patches, some of it needs a lot of configuration, some of it is multi-tiered, so it needs to get installed in multiple virtual machines, you need to configure it all together and so forth. So we sort of have a vision of making it simpler. Something that, well, installing software should just be taking a container and dumping it onto our virtual infrastructure. And then with really the minimal amount of configuration, it should just work. And I think that's that's not sort of a hard vision to have. That seems like a reasonable thing to work towards. And if you actually look out in the industry, there's another industry that has been very successful with this. And I'm specifically thinking about the shipping industry. So it's not a bad thing, I think, to think about your data center sort of as a container ship. It's just steaming along, full speed, highly efficient, with all these software applications running on top of it. And in the container industry, when they moved to containerizations about in the 1950s, it has completely revolutionized that industry. The cost of shipping has gone down dramatically. The speed of shipping has gone up dramatically, and it's really changed the whole world of how goods are shipped around the whole world. So this is really a highly optimized industry. And if we sort of look at containerization from a computer science perspective, what is a container? Well, a container is really a protocol between the supplier of the service and the users of the service. They have agreed on a contract or protocol about how to talk to each other in an efficient manner. It's not efficient for the shipping companies that everybody comes down with, 2 cars and a bicycle and a bunch of balloons and a big truck and say, ship that to the other side of the world. Because if they do that, well, it just takes too long, it's too expensive, and the chances that it actually gets in one piece at the other end is really small. Instead, they say, well, if you want to ship something, bring it in this box. We'll guarantee you it comes with a very low cost to the other end. And the shipping companies can actually optimize the process. They don't have to choose a ship. They could choose a truck, they could choose a plane, they could choose trains, and so forth. So it gives a lot of flexibility of optimizing without actually having to know all the details. So that's sort of what we want to do with software too. Software should be in a container where you can drop it onto your infrastructure and get it to run. Now, software is a little more complicated than containers, but it can be done. We believe it can be done. And some of the things that we're going to show you today is the first step towards this model of having a very ubiquitous software container where you can deploy your software and get it configured with a minimal amount of work. The container has to support all our software workloads. So it has to support multi-tiered, distributed, elastic applications. It has to support integration with the various services that are running in a data center, backup, disaster recovery, monitoring, and so forth. And of course, integration with the other systems, databases, credit card transaction processing systems, and so forth, the whole SOA architecture, and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. But I think some of the things we'll show you today is sort of the first steps in this direction. And sort of as an interesting side note, the container in the shipping industry is actually an ISO standard, right? So this is a standardization organization even in that world, as we have a lot of standards to guide us through in the computer world. Another thing why containerization is very important in our industry is because we don't just deploy software once. Software is something that gets continuously deployed because, for example, in the normal deployment scenario for an application is you have to deploy it for developer, you have to deploy it for testers, you have to deploy it for staging, production, and new updates come along the time. So the process of deployment is a continuously ongoing operation. And by having a standard container across all these environments means that the friction of moving between these various development groups and teams becomes much less. So the amount of wasted cycles become less, it becomes more efficient. Just the same way as moving between a container ship to a truck. You don't have to repackage everything. And finally, from the cloud perspective, this is really what clouds are about. Right? If you get a vCloud account, or you go to Amazon.com on EC2 and get an account, well, they have a standardized container. They don't say, just come along with your RPM or come along with your MSI, we'll run it for you. They say, we'll give you a container, you run in that. And this standard container allows you to choose, do I want to run it inside my application? Do I want to move it out? Should I move it to a cheaper place, 2 months from now, and so forth. So cloud computing, the hybrid cloud, and so forth, this containerization is really key to that. So that's sort of the high-level idea here. To make it a little more concrete, containers, of course, already exist in our products. And in vSphere, we have 3 containers. We have the standard virtual machine that we all know and love. You can install an OS, you install a bunch of applications, you can wrap it all up, and you have a whole nice, single image container for your software solution. A lot of software solutions are multi-tiered. So we also have a container for that called the vApp. That was introduced with vSphere 4. And we'll show you demos about that if for those of you who don't know about it. And then finally, there's the last container, which is the OVF package. And that's a container that allows you to package up stuff and ship it between your installations. So for example, if you want to have a container when it's not deployed on vSphere, you can take it and ship it and store it in a template library. You can ship it to your customers. You can put it on a website so it's ready for deployment. You can even move it between different products like workstations and vSphere and so forth. So I want to talk a little bit more about the OVF format to give you a little background on this. So this is actually a standard. This is one of the primary standards for this containerization model. It's a standard that initially got developed, submitted to DMGF by VMware and Dell and Citrix and IBM, and has been, the first version was done in February 2009. It's actually been supported in our products for 2 or 3 years now, I think. We started supporting a preliminary version 0.9, and now it's supported by all major players in the virtualization industry, as you see, Microsoft, Oracle, and many, many others. And it is going to be announced fairly soon that it's actually just got accepted as an ANSI standard. So that's pretty exciting. I'm pretty sure that will be announced tomorrow. So don't tell anyone. Okay, and it, of course, is also a big basis for the vCloud API. The OVF format is not a very complicated thing. Not that you really need to know the details, but if you have looked at a VM inside a VMware product, you probably know it has a VMX file and there's a bunch of VMDK files. An OVF format is sort of exactly the same thing, but instead of the .vmx file, we have something called a .ovf file. And instead of being a properties file, it's an XML file. But it is essentially just a document that describes a lot of metadata about the virtual machine that is inside this package. The actual bits on the disks are still stored in VMDK format, or VHD. The format actually supports both. In contrast to a .vmx that just has a single virtual machine, inside an OVF package you can store more than one virtual machine. And in contrast to a .vmx file, you can also store a lot of additional information. So we can store EULAs, we can store product information, product version, how to upgrade it, and all kind of stuff. And it's it's designed to be extensible, so a lot of metadata can be added. Secondly, it has a lot of features to support distribution. So if you package up your application or your software solution in an OVF package, it's compressed, so you don't have to store or ship around big flat virtual disks. So it's sparse, compressed, it can be signed, and you can actually also internationalize it. So in some sense, you can think of it a little bit sort of like an MSI version for virtual infrastructure. Once you have one of these, it has all the information about how to install and deploy this software onto your infrastructure. And just to give you sort of a quick view, this is actually some XML that could be part of this OVF descriptor. So it's not very complicated. You could write this in a text editor if you want to, but most of the time you'll just use tools and all this happens underneath the covers. But it's not like soap. It's actually really, really easy. But let's move to a quick demo and see some of this in practice. I think I have to click a button here.
Okay. So the demo setup here is vCenter 4.1 and an ESX 4.1 server, and it's all running virtualized on this laptop.
So Martin, what are you going to show us first here?
I'm going to show you the OVF features in vSphere by showing you how easy it is to deploy a multi-tiered software solution using the OVF deployment wizard. So I'll go to File, Deploy OVF Template. Deployment starts by choosing an OVF file. So this file is the descriptor containing metadata about the software we're going to install. So how many times have you tried to download the wrong virtual appliance with gigabytes of data before you found out about the mistake? So perhaps you wanted version 1.1, but you got 1.0, or perhaps it was the right appliance, but from the wrong vendor. With OVF, all of this information can be included in packets. So now, when I'm deploying it, I can validate it up front before I start downloading the large files. Okay, so this wizard is data-driven. What we see here comes from the OVF file. I can see the product, version, vendor. I can even see how many bytes I'm going to download. I can also see that this package has been signed with a trusted certificate. Okay. And the package can contain license agreements that I have to accept when I'm deploying it. And the default name for the appliance. When you're deploying an appliance, you need to determine virtual hardware requirements. So CPU, memory, disk size, for example. But you might not always know what's right and suitable for a specific application in your scenario. So in this example, if I want to just try out this Sugar CRM appliance, how much memory should I give it? Well, I better give it a gigabyte just to make sure that my experience is smooth. But with OVF, all of this can now be decided by the vendor of the OVF and captured in the file as deployment configurations. So in this example, the vendor has decided that if I want to evaluate it, the appliance will get 0.5 gigabyte of RAM. Okay, and you can put different configurations in there. In this example, we also have a configuration for production, enterprise, and, well, you can really put anything in here. It's all part of the OVF. So again, this is data-driven.
I wonder if that's big enough for VMworld.
Yeah. I just want to try it out today. So, okay, I need to choose some target parameters, disk format.
Most of this stuff is sort of the same thing as when you clone a VM. You have to pick data stores and so forth.
Okay, so IP allocation. Every VM needs an IP address to be available on the network. So how often have you tried to install a VM only to have to go into the console afterwards to perform manual IP configuration? So in other words, provisioning is easy, but configuration is still manual and tedious work. With OVF, there is no longer any need to access the console. I can set up IP configuration during deployment with static or dynamic IPs. Okay. So this customization is done using properties that are specified by the author of the OVF. When I'm deploying an OVF, I need to enter values for the properties. But I can't remember which IP addresses I can use on this network. So let me go back and make vSender take care of it. If I select transient here, vSender will automatically allocate and release IP addresses for the VMs as they're being powered on and powered off, much like a DHCP server. Okay, so I don't have as many properties now. The remaining properties are used for application customization. In this example, I can select a theme, graphical theme for the user interface. I'll go with sunset. There is some account information. A performance setting. Oops, that should be an integer, so 10 is probably okay. And now we're ready to deploy.
Okay, so now it's actually downloading the real bits, and everything is validated, so we can just sit back and wait. But this is probably going to take a little time. So Martin, you said this was a distributed application, but I didn't see anything about multiple VMs or anything here.
It doesn't really matter, because what we're deploying is a software solution, and the user doesn't need to be concerned about how it is architected internally.
Okay.
We can see in the inventory that we get a vApp created here.
Okay, so yeah, it's not a VM icon. Okay, so I think we have a little virtual TV kitchen here, right? So let's cancel this one and move to one we already deployed.
Right.
So this is running against the ESX server running on workstation that is running the VM. So this is probably a little slower than your normal data center, but let's see what we have. We have actually a pre-deployed one here.
Right. So when the deployment finishes, you'll get a vApp in your inventory, much like this one. Okay. So this is Sugar CRM, and of course it will start out being powered off. For this demo setup, I've already powered it on and suspended it to make things a bit faster. So let's power it on. So we see it has power commands just like a VM. We can see the power state. But if we expand it in the inventory, we can see that it actually contains multiple VMs. In this case, a database server and a web server. So as the vApp is being powered on, a lot of things need to happen before we can start using it. All of the VMs need to be powered on, one by one. And the VMs need IP configuration to get an IP address, so with subnet, gateway, and such. The VMs also need to connect to each other. In this example, the Sugar CRM web server needs to connect to the database server before the application is usable. And finally, we would need to figure out the URL of the web application to start using it. Now, with OVF and vApps, all of this happens just as I power on the vApp. So now that it is available, I get a clickable link on the summary screen. I click it, and it actually takes me to the user interface. Okay, so running in ESX in workstation.
Right.
Okay.
It's actually amazingly quick.
So here's the Sugar CRM, and we can see the beautiful sunset theme.
Nice. And we promised on the session on Wednesday we'll do another theme, so you can actually see that this is live. We are no cheating here. So
if we can just recap and see what happened here. So we deployed a multi-tiered software solution from the web, or from a local file in this case. And during deployment, we configured it complete with virtual hardware requirements, network configuration, and application customization. And finally, we powered it on with a single click, even though it is multi-tiered, running in multiple virtual machines.
Okay. So this is probably really hard to do, or can you just show us how you do all this stuff if you want to build one from scratch?
You can also create vApps in vSphere.
Okay. So this was sort of if you get an OVF. So let's see how you actually built this stuff.
Right. So in my inventory here, I have two VMs, PHP database and web server, that happen to be part of an installation running PHP Fusion. Now, if I want to control resources at the application level, what I might do traditionally is group the VMs into a resource pool. Okay, but it doesn't tell me anything about the software that's running inside it. So instead, in vSphere 4, I can create a vApp. New vApp. Let me call it CMS solution. I can set resource allocations. Okay, and now I can drag the VMs inside. Okay, so now with this simple operation, I can now see the power state of the entire application. But I can do more than that. So I can extend it with some product information about the software that's running. I'll go to Edit Settings. And I can, for example, enter a product name, version. Okay. I can also control the start order of the VMs. So in this case, I want the database to start before the web server. So I just need to move these two around. I can control the startup actions and shutdown actions. So shutdown action might, for example, be guest shutdown or suspend. Okay. And now we get the product information on the summary screen. So finally, let me try to power off this vApp so we can see how the shutdown order is enforced. Okay.
Okay, so we just built a vApp with a bunch of VMs, added some metadata. We can now see it's powered off, and I can export this as an OVF package too.
Yes. So you can export it from the vSphere client, and the metadata that we have defined will be exported along with the OVF.
Okay.
So let me show you that. Go to File, Export OVF Template.
And that's it. So that's a lot simpler than deploying. It's just a few clicks, and then it will actually export the disks from the ESX servers that these VMs happens to be on. It will compress the disks so it's as minimal as possible. So even though you have sparse disk and so forth, everything will it's only the bits that are really on the VM that will get moved. And then of course you can take these bits and upload them on a shared drive or ship them to your friends and so forth and your colleagues. All right, so that was all vApps. So what about VMs? Is there something for those guys? I guess I probably have a lot of VMs typically.
Right, so you can extend your existing VMs with some vApp information. So back to the inventory. I have a VM running the Alta Networks Virtual Network Security Analyzer. So it's monitoring traffic on the ESX network. Okay. So this is just a plain VM. I then have a clone of it that has been extended with some product information. So already on the summary screen, we can see the product and the version. I have a link to the vendor. And since the application is running, I also have a link to the application itself, like we saw with Sugar CRM. I'll just click this. And instead of remembering the URL to the web application, I simply have a link to it.
All right. Thank you very much. So let me switch back here. So what we saw here in this demo was some of the features that really make the VI client more than just showing you what VMs you have, but it can actually show you what software solutions you have installed. You can organize or you can add product information to VMs. You can add links to the applications so you can easily find them so you don't have to remember all these URLs. You can organize your multi-tiered applications into vApps. So Virtual Center knows how to power them on, power them off, what information, product information they're running. All this stuff can be encoded automatically into OVFs. You just select the VM or vApp and export it or import it. And finally, the OVF deployment wizard is a hugely customizable, data-driven wizard. So it starts interpreting the data in the OVF descriptor and can really prompt the user for all the relevant information that needs to get prompted. So quite a lot of deployment-specific features here. Now, let's move to the second part about, let's create some templates, right? Let's create some software that can easily get deployed. And it turns out that since Virtual Center 1.0, a big part of this product was to simplify software deployment, to create templates so you can just clone and deploy them. So since, and in the 1.0 version of deployment, we sort of call it traditional way today. So I'll go through that the traditional way you probably tried many times, and then I'll particularly talk about a new way of creating templates that is a little more flexible, probably also a little harder to use, which is called, which uses these OVF properties and the OVF environment. But first of all, once we're talking about templates, we're talking about two different users that needs to use these, two different roles that need to use these templates. There is the author that is responsible for creating the template. And the idea is the author creates a template once. He probably spends a fair bit of time creating the right templates, because creating a good template means that it can be deployed robustly many times over. So it's worth the time actually creating this template. So that's the user roles. In the traditional way of creating a template, if you're an author, is simply creating a virtual machine, installing a bunch of software in that virtual machine, installing tools, verify that everything works, and you just mark your VM as a template. Most of you have probably done this many, many times inside vSphere. You get an icon, as you see here on your right, that it's a template, and it's basically ready for the deployer or the user role to go and deploy this. So the process here of creating a template in the traditional way is actually super simple. It's just like installing software in a VM and installing tools. From the deployer's point of view, it's also very easy. So the deployer comes along, finds the template in the inventory, right-click on it, select deploy, go through the visit, and once you go through the deployment visit, you end up at the screen like this. And this visit has prompted you for a bunch of things that you can customize, right? Because when we're deploying a template, we don't just want a copy of that template. We want a copy of it, but it needs to be customized slightly, right? It needs different IP addresses. It potentially needs to be in a different work group. If it's Windows, it needs different SSIDs and so forth. And this is what this deployment visit that is built into Virtual Center, vCenter is designed to do. Underneath the covers, what happens when you click finish here, there's actually quite a lot of machinery that goes into function here. The first part that it does is that it clones the VM. So it takes a clone of all the virtual disk, all the metadata of that particular template to create a new VM. And then it powers it on. And once it's powered on, it actually downloads an agent into that Windows or Linux guest operating system. And that agent then gets provided the customization information you typed in during the visit, and then it goes in and modifies the OS. So for Windows, it configures the work groups, the network settings, it puts it into sysprep mode, it reboots it a few times, and so forth. So actually quite a lot of machinery that is at work here. And then at the end, it gets powered off, and you have your customized Windows. So that's kind of nice. If you look at this, what the good thing about this deployment method is that it's really simple to use. It's well integrated, transparent, and so forth. You don't really need to know anything about all this machinery that is going on underneath the covers. The bad thing is that it's not very flexible. What if you want to customize something else? What if you want to customize the IP address of the database it needs to connect to or something else? Well, too bad. You will have to just deploy it and then log into the template afterwards and go and do it manually or use some other kind of tools. That's why we have the modern way that is a lot more flexible, that has no limitations on what you can customize. The modern way is actually using the same set of machinery. We're just changing the order and the responsibilities slightly. So let me show it to you. So when you create the template, you as the author is responsible for inserting the agent. There's no automatic agent installed into the system. vCenter doesn't install it. You provide your own agent in the template that is responsible for customizing your software. So in the Sugar CIM system, we had installed a simple shell script that went in and customized these things like the theme in Sugar CIM. So agents are not something big and complicated. It's typically small scripts. At deployment time, vCenter will prompt for the things that needs to get customized. Again, what needs to get customized is provided by the author as a set of properties, and the OVF deployment wizard will prompt for these values. and store them with the VM or the vApp. And then finally, at power on time, these values will be provided to the guest through a standard mechanism, so the guest, so the agent can get these values and customize it. So as you can see, it's really the same set of mechanism. It's an agent that goes and customizes stuff based on a set of properties. But in contrast to the standard or classic way, this is provide full flexibility. It's equally easy for the deployer to go through the wizard and answer all these questions and deploy a template, but he can, from the author's point of view, he can create templates where everything can be customized. The only downside is that, well, it might be a little harder to create the template because you actually have to provide your own agent. So diving into sort of the how you really do it. So this was sort of a high-level description I went through. There's two things you need to know in order to create templates that uses this advanced modern customization technique. One is OVF properties, and the second thing is the OVF environment. OVF properties, you can think of those as parameters on a VM or vApp, things that you get prompted for. Things like, for example, an IP address, or an admin email, or the background theme you want to use and so forth. These can be stored with the OVF or the vApp, VM or the vApp. So you define those. These are the things that should be customized. And then the second piece of the puzzle is, well, how to get these values into the guest, to the agent. And that's where we use what is called the OVF environment, which is actually part of the OVF standard. And that's an XML document. And that's getting put into the guest in sort of a very low-tech mechanism, which is the CD drive. So Virtual Center, or vCenter, well, I'm sort of at the old school here. vCenter will generate an ISO image automatically for this VM, and on that ISO image, it will put a text file. That text file happens to be an XML document that has these key value pairs. And the nice thing about this low-tech version is that it works with any OS you want to use. It can be read by pretty much any tools you want to use, whether you want to write Perl or Python or .NET or something. Fourth, you can use any kind of tools. So putting all this together, the steps for creating an advanced template like Sugar CRM is, well, you create an OVF package. You upload an agent, you define all your properties, you insert your agent, just as we saw in the demo before. At deployment time, the deployer or the user comes in, insert the values for these properties, as we saw Martin do with Sugar CRM just a few minutes ago. And then at the end, once the user hits power on, vSphere will boot this up, generate the ISO image, put in these values, and the agent that you put inside the guest will just customize your template. And you can basically automate the whole process. And this works across multi-tiered applications like we just saw with Sugar CRM. So I think we'll dive into a little demo of this so we can get a feel for how you actually do it in the vSphere client.
Okay, so let's see the OVF environment in practice. So here I have a plain VM running Windows XP, and it's just been powered on.
Okay, so this is a completely plain VM, nothing, no fancy tools or anything?
Just a plain VM. So let's take a look at the guest.
Okay, it looks very plain.
Yeah. Okay,
all right.
Let's take a look at the computer, and we can see that there is something on the CD-ROM drive, the OVF environment. Okay, it's an XML document, as we were promised, and it contains some of the properties that we saw on the slides. Okay, so an email address and an IP address.
So we're just looking inside a guest, and in the CD-ROM there happens to be a CD that has an XML document which actually has some properties. So how did we get vSphere to generate this?
Let's take a look back in the vSphere client. So it's all part of the VM settings. I'll go to Edit Settings. And if we take a look at the CD drive, we can see that vCenter has actually mounted an ISO file on the CD drive. So
that's just automatically generated on power on with whatever the current values are?
Yes. So the reason we got it here was because we specified it as part of the vApp options. So if we go to options, we have vApp options that have been enabled And we can see here that I chose that the OVF environment should be transported to the guest as an ISO image.
Okay, so generating that thing is really just a single click away. And then the final thing is the properties. Where do we specify those?
Right. So you can also specify the properties in here. If you go to Advanced, Properties, we can see the same properties are here with the names, type, and the values we saw in the XML document.
Okay. And so that's the property definitions that the user should get prompted from. And where does the user enter the values for these?
We can go to properties here under vApp options, and we can enter the values. We can't enter them now because the VM is running.
Right. So I guess normally when you deploy an OVF, you'll get prompted during deployment, but you can go in here afterwards and change them if you need to.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks. There we go. All right. So that was sort of a quick demo of the OVF environment. As you can see, using the VI client, it's pretty easy to set up properties. It's pretty easy to get it to generate an OVF environment. And then you can, if you have an application you really want to customize to sort of any kind of extent you would like to do, you can go in and specify these. You get an XML document as shown here. Go in and read this XML document and then propagate these values into your software configuration. Now, the trick here, of course, is to write a script on agent. And I'm not going to, unfortunately, we don't have time, I guess, to go into details of how to do that. I'll show a link to our blog later on, but there's actually examples of these scripts. These can be super simple to super advanced. So it's not necessarily rocket science to create these. So the final part of the talk, I want to talk about a few additional tools that is useful when creating or working with OVFs. First and foremost is the OVF tool, which is now in release 2.0. That's a command line tool that allows you to deploy OVFs and export VMs and vApps to OVFs, and you can do it all from the command line. So instead of, if you don't like to go into the VI client with all the nice UI, you can use this. Very handy for scripting. It's supported on Windows, Linux, and Macs. And it also works great with Workstation and Fusion. So for example, if you want to play with OVFs or deploy OVFs on Workstation and Fusion, that's the tool you want to use too. So it really provides OVF support across the entire VMware virtualization products. OVF properties and the OVF environment is only available in vSphere. So if you want to play around with creating OVF, creating agents, you're sort of stuck with using a vSphere installation. But we actually have a labs project, which we call Flings, which is a command line tool that completely emulates vSphere support for OVF properties and vSpheres, and is integrated with OVF tools. So if you want to play around with the OVF environment, OVF properties on your laptop, either on a Mac with Fusion or on a PC with Windows, a PC with Windows or Linux and Workstation, you can use this. It's a great little command line tool for dealing with this, and quite fun. But we want to show a little demo of OVF tool. An OVF tool is a surprisingly simple but powerful tool. It's based around a source and a target. So you point it at a VM or a vApp. That could either be on vCenter, it could be on ESX, it could be on Workstation, it could be an OVF package of some sort as the source, and the same things as a destination. An OVF tool basically does the transformation of taking the VM or vApp from the source and putting it at the destination you provide. So you can do fancy stuff like, of course, deploying an OVF package on vCenter or ESX. You can also take a VM directly from vCenter and convert it into the VMX format to use with Workstation and Fusion if you want to, since you can combine these source and targets as any way you want. You can also repackage OVFs as OVAs and then all kind of fancy stuff. But let me Martin will give you a quick demo of this tool.
Okay. So let's see the OVF tool in practice. I hope this is large enough for everybody to see. So OVF tool is more or less the Swiss Army knife of OVF, which we can see if I type help, I get a lot of options. We're not going to go through all of them here, just a few examples to show you how powerful scripts you can create. So first, let me show you how to deploy an OVF file to vSphere. So here is an OVF package. It's a small DOS installation, so it's a small VM. And to deploy it to vSphere, I simply specify the OVF file as the source, and then a vSphere locator as the target. I know that it's running on this machine. I have to specify a data center and a host. Can't remember the host name, so let me try this. Okay, luckily OVF tool can help me with some auto-completion. So what just happened here is that OVF tool has actually probed the vSphere inventory, and it will do this regardless of the object it finds. So in this case, it found a host folder, and that is not a valid target, so instead OVF tool tells me what's inside it. So I get the name of the host. So let me try to append that.
It could be a pretty handy feature if you're under stress and doing demos.
Okay. Right, so now it's opening a target.
Okay.
And it starts uploading the files.
So this is a pretty small VM, I take it, that went really fast.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. That might take longer in real life. So did we actually get it into vCenter?
Absolutely. So let's take a look, and we can see we got the VM here, and it has been deployed from an OVF template. Okay, so we can also deploy straight from Workstation to vSphere. Here I have a similar VM, just in the VMX format. In this case, I'll just give it a different name to avoid naming conflicts. But otherwise, I simply specify the VMX file as the source locator, and again, a vSphere locator as the target.
So what happens here is that OVF tool actually automatically takes internally the VMX file, convert it to an OVF, and then take that OVF and deploy it. So instead of you have to do that as 2 steps, you could just convert, specify VMX and vSphere and in one command. That can be pretty handy.
Okay, it opened the target, and it's uploading the disk. So here we simply deploy from Workstation to vSphere in a single command line.
Okay, so we're not going through all the examples here, but I want to show a little more complex example, right? So Sugar CM had all these properties and deployment sections and deployment options and so forth. So how you do a sort of a multi-tiered application with OVF tool?
Well, let me go to Sugar CRM here. And a really cool feature about OVF tool is the probe mode. So the probe mode allows me to inspect an OVF package without actually deploying it. So to invoke it, I simply specify an OVF file as the argument to OVF tool. And I can see pretty much all of the information that I saw in the vSphere deployment wizard. So the product information, hardware properties.
So this could be a pretty handy feature if you just sort of come across an OVF somewhere and you just want to see, well, what is it really all about? Just point OVF tool at it and we'll print out the textual information about what's inside. Okay, so let's go and deploy it.
Right.
So I should warn you that Martin is sort of a power user, partly because they've implemented part of the tool, and partly because I've actually tried this many times. The nice thing about the OVF tool is it has options for everything you want to specify. In the same way as we could use the VI client to get prompted for everything, everything can be customized here. There's even some new stuff that you cannot do through the VI client at the moment, like disk mode. You can specify whether I want fin provision disk, a fig provision disk, and so forth. You can specify deployment options and all that stuff. So if you want to script deployment or just want to do casual deployment from the command line, it's all there. And the hard part of remembering sort of the path to resource pools and folders and stuff like that inside the VI client, if you specify it wrongly, vSphere will then prompt will show you better completions and so forth, so you don't have to remember all these things in details. So I think we're almost done.
Yep, so this should be it.
All right, that didn't look too hard.
Of course, you can script this.
Right. Once you have done it a few times, it's actually not that hard.
Question about the vApp part. If you have something like a web application where you have multiple front-end web servers, do you have a single template and ask someone how many of these front-end web servers they want?
Right. So the question is sort of, does OVF support sort of elasticity that you can create multiple versions of, can I get prompted on one web server, 2 web servers, 3 web servers, and so forth. And at the moment, it doesn't support that. It's something that is getting looked into both at the standard side and at the product side. But there's a fixed number of VMs in each OVF package. And, okay. So the question is whether you can specify multiple networks when you're deploying it. An OVF package can contain many networks. You specify how many networks it has. In this particular case, in this demo, there was just one network defined in the OVF package and one network in our setup, so we don't prompt. But otherwise, you will get prompted for those kind of things. Well, let's just quickly go through this demo. We'll have time for questions afterwards. Okay, so it's deploying.
It's deploying, and we can see in the vSphere client that we got the vApp with the VMs inside it. We can track the progress, uploading the disks.
All right. Okay, so that was the quick demo of the OVF tool. And we'll switch back to the slides here. I hope. Whoop. There we go. All righty. So I hope you got a feel for this. The OVF tool is free. You can download it today. The good thing about all the demos that we do today is that we actually do recommend you do them at home. And most of the tools are free. There's 2 other tools that I want to talk about. One is VMware Studio. As most of this talk has been centered around making it really easy to deploy software in a robustly and sort of repeatable fashion. Another big problem, of course, is to create the templates. As we see, well, you can create a VM, you can install the software, you can create all these properties and so forth. But what if, next month or something, you need to change something? Do you have to start the whole process again from scratch? That's where VMware Studio can come and help you, since it can automate the process of actually creating OVF packages. So I'll talk a little bit about that. VMware Studio is free, too. You can download it today. It's actually shipped as an OVF package itself. It's a virtual appliance. So you can just download it and run it on vSphere workstation with either OVF tool or the vSphere client. And I also want to talk about a good place to find OVFs and a good place to actually put your OVFs up if you're an ISVs that want to distribute software content to all the users. This is called the Virtual Appliance Marketplace. But first, one slide about Studio. So Studio is sort of a very simple product in some sense, but gives you a lot of power to create templates. So the trick is, if you want to create a VM, well, you of course have to create the VM itself with all the right settings. You have to install the OS. You have to install a lot of packages inside that OS. So that could be MSIs, or it could be RPMs if it's Linux. You might want to install some agents in there to customize IP addresses and other things. You might want to install a management framework with web servers and with a web console and so forth. And Studio actually provides templates for most of this stuff. So instead of coming up with your own agents, Studio comes with a lot of these. And then it all put together with a build profile. So once you have specified all this stuff, you push one button, and Studio automates the process of installing the OS, installing all this software, installing all the agents, and then in the end, it ships out an OVF package. So that's, of course, great. So when you come along 3 months later, or maybe 2 weeks, saying that, well, I need slightly different version of this template. Maybe I needed more memory to my virtual machine. Or maybe I needed to update one of the agents or one of the software package to a newer version in there. All you do is to go in and change the build profile in Studio and then run the whole script again. And 10 minutes later, you have a new template. So much easier to reproduce, creating templates and so forth. And it's all done through a nice UI, or you can go in and edit the build profiles in an editor if you want to. So think of it as sort of batch-oriented OVF package generation. The second thing is the Virtual Appliance Marketplace. So you might be familiar with this. It's been on our website for a long time, at least 3-4 years. Recently, it has gotten new support for OVF packages. So it's much easier to go in and find OVF packages and install software from the Virtual Appliance Marketplace. In this particular case, I've logged down to the website. So this is on vmware.com. So you can just click on Virtual Appliances. And I've gone in and searched for OVF. And after this search, it actually finds a bunch of virtual appliances there that are shipped in this OVF package. It's shipped in the OVF format. And you can see there's a download link on this. So if I click on the download link, it takes me to the download page. And this is one of the new features that the VAM, or the Virtual Appliance Marketplace, now has an import to vSphere button. So if you tried to use it in the past, where you have to download a zip file or a tar file or something, and you have to figure out how to get it all on your ESX servers, now all you have to do is to click this import to vSphere button. And once you click that, it pops up a window with a URL. So you simply take this URL, copy it into your clipboard, switch to the vSphere client, paste it into the OVF deployment visit, and just go through there, and the whole deployment happens automatically. Automatically pulls it from the web. If it has EULAs, if it has OVF properties and so forth, you get prompted for all that stuff, and it just gets installed. You can also use this URL with the OVF tool if you just want to try to install it on a workstation or Fusion or something like that. It's really nifty. It really streamlines this whole process of installing OVF packages from the net. So, finally, the last thing, as I promised, there is a link here to our blog. So this is a blog written by my development team and the studio development team. So basically the two teams that are really into sort of the guts of how to write OVF packages and creating tools for around OVF. So blogs.vmware.com/vapp. There's a listing of various topics that has been posted there recently. There's a lot more topics on the web. So I encourage everybody to go and take a look if they want to learn some more. Also encourage people, if they read something, they don't understand it, or have all the questions about how to do stuff, just post on this community, and we'll read it and respond it and write some more stuff on it. So that's it. We went through these containers of vApps, vApp metadata, OVF packages, and the OVF environment, and how to all use it. So, good.